Well, hello, everybody. I am Marc Zienkiewicz, an editor for Seed World Group, and welcome to Seed Speaks. This is a video series brought to you by Seed World Group. This month, we're talking with people from across the industry about science communication and how we as an industry can better educate the public about science and what we do as an industry to help bolster public trust. Today, we're talking with some experts about an important topic, and that is the role of Indigenous people, people of color, and other diverse groups in our industry, and how we can build innovation strategies that address gaps and opportunities therein, and thereby bolster public trust in our industry. The theme I chose for today's topic was changing the face of our industry, and it's an important topic that I've wanted to discuss for a while now. So I'm joined today by Kelly Lendsay, a Cree Métis leader with a strong national reputation as one of Canada's foremost innovators of Indigenous workplace inclusion. Kelly's president and CEO of Indigenous Works, which is committed to increasing Indigenous engagement in the Canadian economy. Kelly couldn't join us live today, so I pre-recorded my chat with him. So we'll hear from Kelly shortly. I am on live with Fabian Leon. He is a grad student pursuing a master's in plant breeding at Texas A&M University, working with sorghum. He's also one of this year's National Association of Plant Breeders Borlaug Scholars. I'm also joined by Ebony Webber, Chief Officer of Operations for Minorities in Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Related Sciences, or MANNERS for short, based in Atlanta, Georgia. The mandate of Manners is to promote academic and professional advancement by empowering minorities in agriculture, natural resources, and related sciences. Welcome, everybody. How is everyone today?
Doing great. Thank you.
Doing well.
Excellent. Thanks for your time today, guys. Like I said, this is a topic I've been wanting to cover for a while now. Fabian and Ebony, you're both well versed in this area of creating new opportunities for people from diverse backgrounds. I'm not just talking about diversity and inclusion initiatives, but sort of going to the next level, I'd say, and creating new career and business opportunities by literally changing the face of our industry, as I said earlier. Fabian, I'd like to start with you. As Kelly will point out in a few moments, Indigenous people have played and still play a big role in plant science. I first interviewed you this past summer during the National Association of Plant Breeders meeting, and you said that Indigenous people have some of the proudest agricultural traditions and that plant breeders have to be ready to welcome those backgrounds and adapt with them. There's a great quote from you. You said in our Seed World magazine, you said, "In our discipline, we have to remember that we owe our major crops to Indigenous people first, not modern breeding techniques." I think that's a crucial point to help set the stage for our discussion here. You identify as a Chicano person. Chicano is a chosen identity for many Mexican Americans in the United States. The label Chicano is sometimes used interchangeably with Mexican American, but the terms do have different meanings. Now, you've actually volunteered with Manners in the past to create new opportunities for people of Mexican and Native American identity in agriculture. So this is something that's close to your heart as a young plant breeder. Can you talk a little bit about why your Chicano identity is important to your career in plant breeding? Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, I did say all those things, and thanks for interviewing me back then as part of the Borlaug Scholars highlights. And yeah, Chicano to me is I think just a mix of identities and one key dimension of my identity as well. Growing up in Central Kentucky, I didn't really have a choice but to identify with it because I was the only one, and it was a very, very much singling out sort of experience that I had to just grow up with. I live in Texas now at Texas A&M University, and the demography here is a lot more Hispanic and Latinos, and I feel a greater sense of community with that. But Kentucky didn't have that, so I had to face that pretty early on when I was growing up and visiting Mexico to see my family and seeing the kind of poverty and agricultural barriers that they had there. And those things go hand in hand. And when it came time to pick a career, I knew I wanted to pursue agriculture, and my parents had to leave the family farm back home in Mexico so I can come to the US and get an education. And that's why I decided on my career of plant breeding, because I was in high school at the time that they were awarding the World Food Prize for biotechnology revolutions and like agrobacterium transformation and everything. And I knew that biotechnology was going to be a hype space for somebody to get a career. And I knew that that was my spin on agriculture, to instead of working in the fields, breaking my back the way my parents had to do as migrant farm workers when they came to the US, I could really put an intellectual spin on it and, convince them I'm not going to be a doctor or a lawyer, but I promise, my life's going to be a little bit better. So that's what I told my parents. And that's why my Chicano identity is kind of just goes hand in hand with my career as a plant breeder. Ultimately, plant breeders, our job is to leverage diversity to the best of our ability. And people and plants aren't that dissimilar. I think leveraging diversity is a challenge in both people and plants. And as a plant breeder, I approach it, given my experiences, the way everybody else has to do. And I think my experiences are pretty unique given where I came from and what my story says. So hopefully I can just carry that into a plant breeding career and kind of make the best use of diversity for both people and plants.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that your parents were migrant farm workers, and them coming to the United States. You told me that was supposed to be your ticket away from agriculture. But it's interesting that the whole experience, your lived experience with that, actually led you into agriculture. And so that's a really, really great story that I know has really inspired me, and that's one of the reasons I wanted you to be on Seed Speaks here today. So thank you for being on today and telling that story. Ebony, as someone who works to connect diverse students and professionals and aid in their leadership development, people like Fabian, why do people from diverse backgrounds make such effective leaders in agriculture? What do they bring to the corporate table and beyond that?
Well, I think first, thank you for having me on today. I think why people from diverse backgrounds make good, effective leaders is one is they're bringing a lot of empathy to the role. I think, as Fabian mentioned, is something about that singling out or that isolation that really makes you feel for others. And so, in being an effective leader, to me, as a servant leader myself, it's all about serving the mission that we're working towards. It's all about making sure that you're taking care of your people, which is your biggest and greatest resource, and just supporting one another. And that's what manners is all about. And so I think I have never in my mind servant leadership, being an effective leader, I never separated that from leadership, because to me that's a core component or a core trait that should be embedded in all of our leaders, are to be servant leaders. And so I think having that regard. And also, I think a lot of times individuals from diverse backgrounds are, kind of not starting at the same place. And so there's this hunger, there's this kind of grind, so to speak, that, for most parts, you're not going to outwork someone that has something to prove, or at least feel like they have something to prove. And so there's this amazing work ethic that goes along with that servant leadership that I think just makes a really good, effective leader in this space.
Absolutely. And I love how you talk about work ethic. Being in this industry is a lot of work, getting into the industry, being successful in the industry. And I wanted to touch on this idea of difficulties. Fabian, there was another great quote from your Seed World interview. You said, "There do exist barriers to Chicano and Native Americans in my scientific discipline. There are stereotypical notions that brown people are only on the bottom rungs of the agribusiness ladder." You went on to say that current immigration and labor policies still exploit agricultural workers who are prominently Latino and Hispanic. All of this makes crop sciences and agricultural sciences a hard sell for young brown kids to buy into, end quote. Can you speak to that a little bit and tell us how we as an industry can help these young people to buy in?
Yeah, it's a tough narrative. I'd have to say, like I shouldn't be here. Like I think I'm here in spite of, and particularly because I put a chip on my shoulder because I didn't have a community growing up or getting the first phases of my education, and it's hard. It's a marketing challenge that we agriculture has its stereotypes. People driving tractors or walking behind a mule or something. Cows, plows, and sows, and it's not just about that. And minoritized communities also have their stereotypes, and there's slurs and everything that goes that way, and both are horrible for obvious reasons, and really kind of divisive. And they're not by accident, and it takes a lot of intentionality to kind of get over those things, especially if you want to team build and kind of get your agribusiness organization to the next level, or get your particular research team to the next level to think of innovations that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So I think it's a marketing challenge for both, but the positive thing is that there's already groups working on it. So I mentioned Manners and SACNAS, both organizations that I've been involved in, where I found mentors to kind of help me through my journey, and kind of keep me sane throughout that process. But there's also others, organizations like the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, and the United Farm Workers Association, working at all levels of agribusiness or agriculture to really kind of help marginalized communities kind of find the resources that they need. It's underrepresentation is not a problem of a particular community can't handle being in a particular sector or doing the work. If anything, Hispanic and Latinos have proved that we can endure the worst of the work and still persist and remain resilient in the agricultural disciplines. I think underrepresentation is different factors that affect it. Obviously, racism, institutional and otherwise, and lack of literacy, lack of opportunities, and just the fact that the narrative that like parents tell younger generations is that you don't want to do this, you don't want to break your back, and I think that that's going to change going forward. So with social media and the TikTok generation, we're going to show all the breadth of opportunities that there are in the seed industry and the agriculture industry, and that's going to entertain a larger, more diverse audience that might pique their interest and kind of want to get involved. That's what I'm crossing my fingers for, and I think that's one of the positive things going forward. The more we can support those groups and the more we can support that message, and really shake things up, I think the more sustainable our discipline is going to be. In any plant breeding program, the less diverse you are, you may still be like making yield gains, but it's not a sustainable yield improvement strategy. So if you want to continue making yield gains into the next century or into the future, you have to inject diversity into your program. So there's groups that are doing that for people, the same way that plant breeders think about doing it for plants. So that's the other exciting thing about plant breeding is that we already have the mental strategy to do it. We just need to do it on people now.
Yeah, you use that word diversity, and I'm glad you used that word. That leads me to my next point, which is diversity and inclusion, which is a great concept. But I think sometimes it makes us fall into this trap of only including people who have already managed to break into our industry. And so we're selecting from a really small pool. And what I wanted to do on today's episode was talk a little about making this agribusiness ladder more accessible and easier to climb, but even maybe removing that ladder altogether, right? Like this idea of having a ladder that people have to climb to get to that ivory tower at the top, I think is probably kind of outdated. Ebony, from an organizational standpoint, what have you found is the most effective way of making change in this regard to really create new business opportunity for people in our industry?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it really starts on something Fabian listed was that intentionality piece. I think when you're when you're trying to make change, and we all know change is hard to accept, you have to be intentional, and you have to be persistent, and you have to be consistent. And I think that's been the issue through the years, is that there hasn't been this consistency to keep the effort going. I think a lot of times companies become frustrated that they're not getting what they will consider the outcomes that they're looking for. But it has taken us centuries to build this environment, and it's not going to be deconstructed, with the stroke of a check, or one check, or with, one season of investment. It's going to take time, effort, and continuous investment in order for us to see the changes that we want to see. And I think in terms of business development opportunities, I think, a lot of our opportunities lie in really helping to shape the future narrative. We talk about all of the new careers, the green careers, and the careers that haven't even been thought of yet. I think that's what we have to sell, those opportunities. We have to sell excitement about agriculture, because everyone is already tied to the industry. Like you said, we all have to eat every day. We all have to wear clothes every day, and we all hopefully can go somewhere and lay our heads every night. And so, because of those three factors, we all are closely tied to agriculture day to day. And for us as an organization, Manners, we work to really try to help expose students who feel like they have no connection to agriculture, to really show how their lives would not be the same if they had to worry about what they're going to eat every day. And so I usually tell students that I'm working with is that you get to dream about what you want to be when you grow up because of agriculture. Because if we were all focused on what we were going to eat, then that would be all we were focused on. And so if you want to be a part of an industry that really is shaping and changing the world, agriculture is where you want to be. And with the students that we're connected with now, the new generation of students are very mission driven. They're very socially responsible. And so I think those are the type of messages that resonate, is what are the big problems that they're going to be solving. Not so much about the careers and the money that they're going to make, which those are great things too, but it's more so about the issues that they're going to be involved with in solving, and how those issues impact their communities.
Yeah, we really need that ground up, that grassroots effort, like an organized effort to really capitalize on these opportunities. And that's why we're going to hear from Kelly next. As I said, Kelly is CEO of Indigenous Works based in Canada. Indigenous Works has a new 6-year initiative called Luminary to design and implement an Indigenous innovation strategy and a plan that actually leads to economic transformation and employment. The Luminary Agriculture Project will focus on the role of research and innovation as a catalyst to new employment, business growth, and increased well-being for people engaged in this sector. My chat with Kelly is about 8 minutes long, so we're going to play that now, and then we will conclude our discussion with Fabian and Ebony before we sign off for the day. So I will turn the floor now over to Kelly. Now, in the 5-year plan, you talk about gaps between Indigenous and corporate agricultural worlds. You did a 2017 survey and found that 85% of corporate Canada is disengaged with, as you say, no credible plans to work with Indigenous people, businesses, and communities, leaving Indigenous companies with a lack of connections and entry points to the non-Indigenous businesses and organizations in this sector. Can you talk a bit about that disengagement, why it exists, and how we can begin to change that?
This survey was a survey of 511 large and medium-sized companies. And as you said, the 85% were disengaged. We gave everybody an engagement score. You could get potentially 100 points or 100%. And the average engagement score was 13, a dismal 13. But here's the interesting question. Who's the most engaged sector in Canada? Well, it's the resource sector. The resource sector, many of them have been doing Indigenous engagement strategies and practices for 20, 30, 40 years. And many of them scored in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s on their engagement score. What we uncovered, though, is what about the rest of the economy? Agriculture, IT, advanced manufacturing, hospitality. It's a big economy. Where are the engagements and partnerships? And we found very little. And in fact, what was really alarming is only 1 in 4 companies recognized the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. So we've got this gap. So part of this work, doing this sectoral work, is designed to bring together like-minded players, in this case in the agribusiness and agri-foods area, and look at how can we create support the dialogue, create the exchange, work towards some meaningful objectives and strategic components together that are going to address Indigenous peoples, the labor market opportunities, the business opportunities, the commercial opportunities, in some cases deal with rights issues, land issues, and so on, water issues, and bring this all together with mainstream companies and with our own Indigenous companies who are in this space. And when we do that, we think this sectoral strategy will create a gateway for more companies to come in and for current companies to expand their work and their markets and achieve that well-being and jobs that we're talking about.
We talk a lot in this industry about new plant breeding techniques, gene editing, etc. But I find we often leave out the fact that Indigenous people have been doing plant breeding for thousands of years. Can you speak to that a little bit? What does closing that engagement gap between Indigenous agricultural businesses and the research community look like?
You know, it's interesting you bring up seeds, and it was the Huron who, you know, this goes way before Mendelssohn's genome experiments, right? Genetic experiments. The Huron had already invented, I think, 47 varieties of corn. And I think 2/3 of the world stuff that we have today comes from indigenous food sources. To your point, though, is that through observation and trial, different breeding systems were tried and different products were created. The one that's really interesting that might catch you by surprise is we were talking to one of our partners in the Luminary Agribusiness Initiative, Dr. Stephen Cross, and he's an expert in seaweed, and he calls them seed plants. And they actually take seeds. You talk about seed planting, and they plant the seeds in the ocean to grow these beds of seaweed. It's a $10 billion industry. Asia leads the way. They forecast that seaweed could provide 10% of the world's future foodstuffs. It could put a dent in poverty in a major way in many nations around the world. And guess who has the most diverse species of seaweed in the world, or sea plants? Canada, 633 species. Who has the least developed industry in the world? Canada. So here's an opportunity. Already we've identified 15 First Nations in BC that want to look at this, but we could be developing not just the seeds to plant and grow the seaweed and the sea plants and then create the value-added products. We could not only be creating businesses, but we could actually be growing an industry on all sides of the oceans, east, west, and the north with the Inuit, and creating an Indigenous branded industry around seaweed and sea plants. So to me, this is the link between, we need to do the research, build out the innovation agenda in terms of understanding these food products and systems, and from the planting to then the harvesting to then the value added. Where are the markets? Are they in Canada? Are they in BC? Are they indeed around the globe? And where we did a webinar with Indigenous businesses. We had over 100 people attend to learn more about this. So we need to do this educational marketing to explain to people there are these opportunities that we could start to embrace. And when we do, we're going to create opportunities, not just in Canada. The Maori have already reached out to us. We have a meeting coming up to discuss seaweed and seaweed production as a real opportunity in innovation. So it's an example using your seeds, Mark, of not just planting our lentils and soybeans and specialty crops. We might be planting seeds in the ocean.
Before I let you go, one of the themes of this season of Seed Speaks is science communication and bolstering public trust in what we do. What can the corporate ag world do to help in this effort? And why could this effort help bolster public trust in our industry?
There's a few key points here. Number one, Nutrien is our presenting sponsor of Luminary's Agribusiness and Agri-Food Strategy. Why is Nutrien involved? They see the opportunity for Indigenous innovation. we are uncovering some new food sources. There's the wapato out of British Columbia, which is basically a potato tuber. This was a commercialized product 700 years ago that could come back as a new food source for the community, for the region, the province, the country, maybe the world. Nutrien sees that agribusiness and food sovereignty and food security is a global issue. Indigenous people want to be part of the solutions. And so our invitation to your members and to companies is to say, join us, be part of co-creating this very, very exciting luminary agribusiness and agri-food strategy. We welcome diverse thoughts. And even if you don't know much about Indigenous issues, you are going to bring your knowledge and your expertise. We'll bring the Indigenous players to the table, and together we'll start to suss out where and how can we build strategic pillars in specific targeted outcome areas that are around the economic transformation, the jobs, the products, the processes. And like I said, it's very sort of purposeful planning. We want to see at least 20 to 25 pilot projects to get launched in the 2022, 2023. We'll continue to do the mapping and report that knowledge and share that knowledge in our knowledge hub. And when we do this, we're going to really start to co-create some innovation in this sector. So that's our invitation. Check us out at our website. And if you'd like to receive the Luminary Charter, it'll describe where and what your role would be as we move together. And we'd certainly welcome you into our partnership.
And that website is indigenousworks.ca, correct?
Correct. Indigenousworks.ca, and then look for the /luminary within the website.
Looking forward to seeing this develop. Thanks for joining me, Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Now, Kelly said something that really struck me, and that was the invitation that the Indigenous community is making to the agribusiness world to join them in this initiative. We sign off here. I just wanted to talk about how that speaks to public trust. To me, that's significant because it speaks to this fact that, to strengthen public trust, the public needs to relate to and identify with what we do. Right? Like, I pulled some statistics about how the makeup of our society has changed. According to US Census estimates, there are 40 million Black people, African American people in the United States, 60 million Hispanic people. In Canada, over 7 million Canadians identified as a member of a visible minority in the 2016 census. We only have 35 million people in Canada, so 7 million people. Like, that's huge. Right. And so people like Kelly, they're inviting the industry to work with them on these initiatives. We're talking about millions of people who are saying, come and work with us. Like, this is a huge opportunity, I think, and really has potential to bolster public trust. I mean, if I'm saying, GMOs are safe to eat, trust me. Pesticides are safe and sustainable to use, trust me on that. If you can't relate to me as a person and I'm telling you these things and you don't feel that you have anything in common with me, I think that really hurts us as an industry. So starting with you, Ebony, what do you see as the benefits in bolstering public trust by changing the face of the agriculture industry, and how can we engender that trust?
Yeah, I think you hit the key on the head, the nail on the head, Mark, when you said having that representation. I think when people see individuals that resonate with their communities, that have some shared backgrounds and experiences, then there is more trust because they feel like those people get it, like they're from where I'm from. And so there is more, there's more intention there, there's more willingness there to trust. I think also by inviting, such as in manners where you have NGOs, academic universities, industry, and government working together, there's a sense of transparency and there's some accountability. And I think those are other two factors that people need beyond just representation. There needs to be a system of checks and balances. And then if someone is caught doing something wrong, how do you hold them accountable? Because in lack of following up with those consequences and accountability, then there's nothing to trust in. And so I definitely think that transparency and accountability has to go along with who the messengers are of the message.
Fabian, I'll give you the last word. How can we go about engendering this trust in people who maybe don't currently have that trust in our industry?
Yeah, as an aspiring researcher, one of the first things I learned, I was doing an internship in extension research, is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's one of the biggest lessons that I try to carry with me day to day. If you find the most groundbreaking, biological phenomenon as a researcher, that's great. But until it affects the real people in the real world, and you commercialize it or you put it in the hands of farmers, it doesn't really matter. And I think we've seen a lot of lack of trust and a lot of audience consumer perceptions that take ideas and they run with it for better or for worse, and it's because we're not delivering the marketing in the most sustainable and key ways. I think one of the important things that would affect our communities is transparency. So the big agrochemical companies, seed and chemical companies, don't always have the best transparency or track record. So they'll make mistakes and then people find out about it later. And it just continues to build these stereotypes for agriculture. But I think going forward, where with the reinvigorating of the industry with more diversity and really including some different perspectives, I think we'll be able to kind of anticipate some of those problems before they happen, and really get ahead of our messaging so that we can make sure that the agricultural products and innovations that need to happen do happen, and then they do eventually get used by consumers, because ultimately that's really the only sustainable option.
Well said. Yeah, the way we go about this is very, very important, and often manage to do something right. And like we saw with the whole GMO issue, our industry maybe didn't approach that right the first time, and that really hurt us in the long run. So well said, Fabian. Thank you, Ebony. Thank you, Fabian, for joining me live on our show today. It was great to talk with you both.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you to Kelly for joining me as well. That's all the time we have today. Thank you to our audience for spending your lunchtime with us. Tune in next Wednesday when our host Ashley Robinson will tackle the topic of climate change and what seed technology and agriculture can offer as solutions to the challenge. Join us then and have a great week, everybody. This is Marc Zienkiewicz of Seed World Group signing off.